Shabbat Shalom. As I'm sure all of you are aware, I was honored to participate in the Orlando Martin Luther King commemoration interfaith service. I think it actually has an officially longer title, but that's the short version, this last Sunday. And yes, this is now Martin Luther King weekend, but last Sunday is when they traditionally hold this event in order to be able to not compete with all of the other Martin Luther King Jr. events on this weekend. But it was a little different last week. It was a little different than weeks before, or rather years before. In years past, we would meet up at City Hall, and there would be a large community march from all the different interfaith groups, and we would march to a local place of worship, often the Methodist Church just around the corner, and then there would be a huge gathering during the service. Well, Omicron had other ideas this year, and that meant that we had the participants of the service in that room. There was no march, and everything was live streamed. And as much as I appreciate Rabbi Kay, who was in charge of putting together the program this year, making the best if he could of a bad situation, there was one part that I was especially disappointed in. And that was the singing of "We Shall Overcome" at the end. "We Shall Overcome" is not exactly a complicated song. It's a very solid, good, welcoming song to sing. And usually at the end of each of these interfaith groups, each year for Martin Luther King, we will sing "We Shall Overcome" with the hundreds of people gathered in the room. And it is an amazing experience to sing a song that has quite simple lyrics and quite simple melody with 100, 200, 300 people all belting it out. This year, obviously we didn't have hundreds of people in the room. Instead, there was a lead performer who was exceptional. His voice was absolutely magical. But that meant the rest of us, the other 12 or so people in the room, well, we didn't sing quite as loud as we did when there were 300 of us in the room. There was something awkward, it felt, holding us back, that as there was one person performing and the other 12 of us there, that the 12 of us were not going to sing as loudly as we would were there to be 300 people in the room, which is really counterintuitive. And I found myself falling into this pattern of dialing down my volume along with everyone else around me, and I reflected on how ironic it is that when the room is full and my voice doesn't matter, I sing louder than when the room is empty and my voice could actually make a difference. But then that is the way. That is how we act in the world. Not only with regards to singing, but also with regards to things like racial justice, where if there is a large mob and in support of racial justice, it's easy to be a full-throated supporter. If there isn't so much of a mob, it is a little harder to stand up and say it alone. But I want to focus not on that, but on the specific mechanics of singing, because this is, after all, not only Martin Luther King weekend, but also Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of Shirat Hayam, the song that Debbie chanted for us so beautifully, as well as the song of Devorah that goes along with it as a parallel. This is our singing Shabbat. And yet it is hard for Jews to sing. It is hard, especially for conservative Jews, to sing. And I think that is because we are children of history. We are children of tradition. And there are some difficulties with how we sing traditionally in Jewish groups over the last couple hundred years. So let me do a little bit of a recap, bring you up to speed, and then let's see if we can't actually put a little bit more of the change into our tradition and change slogan from the conservative movement. So obviously, edge of the sea, we have just been liberated from Egypt. Moses begins to sing, Miriam begins to sing, the timbrels are going, everybody sang. No problem, right? How did they all know the words? How did they all know the words? Was there someone with a giant cue card holding up that says, Micha Mocha, and like for each of the different verses? No one was writing it out. In fact, the Midrashim say that it was divine inspiration, that all of us were touched by God's Spirit in order to be able to sing. Other midrashim say, no. We don't have to go to a miraculous form here. We can instead say that this was call and repeat. That Moses would sing a verse, and then everyone else would repeat that same verse. So it would go back and forth throughout. But everybody agrees that everybody was singing. That may seem like easy. But does that mean that Jews continue to have large, everybody singing gatherings for all of our worship services? Well, what were the primary worship services in the days of the wilderness and then later with the temple? Sacrifices. They don't exactly lend themselves to song. It's not exactly like you all get together and sing, let's kill the sheep, let's kill the sheep, let's kill the sheep, and gather the blood. At least we do that now, actually, ironically enough, in some of the versions of Song for Musaf, but we make sure that we do it in the Hebrew so that most people don't understand that we're singing about killing a sheep. Instead, there were Levites, and the Levites would provide kind of a background chorus to the activities of the Mishkan and then later the temple. But by and large, there wasn't any sign of widespread communal singing on a regular basis. The occasional poems, the occasional songs, certainly people must have sung in the privacy of their own homes and for more casual or secular affairs. But it doesn't seem like singing was a primary community activity for most of that time period, which makes sense because those activities, the sacrifices and activities that are taking place during those generations, were first and foremost personal. Personal. Right? You brought a sacrifice. It was either for your sin or for your celebration, but you brought it. Why would there be a crowd of people at that point at the Mishkan with you joining in to sing? There would be a line of people, each waiting to bring the sacrifice that they needed to or wanted to bring at that time. There was no synchronization of worship. That would not come until we ended up in Babylon. That would not come until after the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE. Prior to that, Jewish worship was an individual affair. And as such, communal choral singing was not a part of how we expressed our connection and devotion to God. We were each called upon to privately sing our own Shir Chadash, our own new song. We were each expected that we would give our own song and praise to God whenever we felt so moved. But we wouldn't expect everyone else to join in with us together as a group. It would be an individual affair, except for the Levite background singers. But with the destruction of the temple, there came a new cause, a new reason to come together and to put voice to the words in a way that would perhaps bind us together. Without the temple, without Jerusalem, without even land to call our own at that time, the synagogue and community worship and study became of utmost importance. And we began to introduce the idea that some of those songs the Levites had been singing could be sung by us as well. And this was the birth of what we would now recognize as the synagogue. It was born out of that necessity, and it was born with the idea of study, of prayer, and song. But still, prayer, for most of the next 2,000 years, was a personal affair. Yes, you would do it together now in a synagogue rather than individually at the door to the Mishkan or in the privacy of your home. But each person is responsible for his or her own tefillah, for his or her own amidah, and the different brachot that go throughout the service. Yes, you can ride the coattails of someone else and say amen to them if you are incapable of doing the prayers yourself, which with the English translation is a little unlikely. But you still need to do it yourself. It has to be your amen. And in fact, for the next 2,000 years, this was such a characteristic of Jewish worship that we would only synchronize momentarily at different parts of the service, whether it be for the Baruch Hu, or whether it be for the Kedusha, or whether it be for a Kaddish, that we became known among especially our Christian neighbors as completely chaotic in our worship. Because you would have one guy that was already begun the Amidah, another guy who'd already finished it, someone that was still on the Shema, and each of them would be praying in a more or less vocal level, not so loud that it was filling the room, but not so soft that it couldn't be heard. And it sounded like quite a hubbub, a hullabaloo, a balagan, we would say in modern Hebrew. It was confusing, it was disorientating, and from those that came from outside and saw this, they considered it to be inelegant and lacking in decorum. Now, for most of our history, we could care less whether we were perceived as inelegant or lacking in decorum. What mattered is that each prayer was coming from each person, that my words were my words, my heart was guiding my prayer, and I was going to do it among my people, and that was what was important. I didn't need to sing in harmony with the person next to me. I didn't need to even be on the same page as the person next to me. I just needed to be together with them while each of us spoke to our own God. It's a beautiful and powerful image that got completely wrecked in the 1800s. Because in the 1800s, European society dangled a carrot in front of us and said, you know, Jews, if you just fit in a little better, maybe we'd stop treating you so terribly. And many Jewish people took that at face value, and it was meant at face value by some people. Offensive as it was still better than perhaps being treated so terribly. And one of the first things that was changed was we went from having our Shaliach Tzibur somewhere around here, facing that way, meaning towards the ark, because they were just a representative of the community that were participating in the service along with everyone else, and each of you would be doing your own thing, but they would be kind of roughly keeping a pace for the service, to putting the Shaliach Tzibur up here, at the front of the room, where the ark was. No one had ever led a service from where the ark was, because the Shaliach Tzibur wasn't a representative of the ark. They weren't a representative of the Torah, and they weren't a representative of God. They were a representative of the people, the congregation. So why would they stand up in front of the congregation rather than in the midst of the congregation? Well, because that's what they did next door at the church. That's how they did it. And especially in Germany, but then spreading to other Jewish communities, it became advantageous to imitate the behavior of our brothers and sisters from the Christian communities in the countries that we lived. They had a raised platform at the front of the room, so we moved our platform to the front of the room. They had services that were quiet. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floors of the cathedral because you didn't say anything except for the required responses. And when you did, okay, yes, you would sing together, but you would sing together in the highest of beautiful artistic form. Remember, the 1800s, we are coming off of Mozart and Beethoven and Bach and all of the incredible classical composers that are still considered to be the high watermark of Western civilization. And that is what influenced the early vocal stylings of our people that were looking to fit in, that were looking to acculturate, that were looking to be accepted. If you wonder why many of the melodies that are most traditional, most famous, sound like they are almost taken from either a high church or an opera, it's because they were. They were heavily, heavily inspired by those modes of music. Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai. I mean, we might as well be doing a full Wagner opera at that point. It matches the mood of the words, don't get me wrong. But when done correctly, according to the real music that was written for that piece, I would imagine that most of us in this room wouldn't even be able to come close. So what have we had to do? We have had to take traditional melodies that only got more and more complicated, more and more elaborate, more and more beautiful, but more and more inaccessible to the average set of vocal cords. Music that became so famous that people were actually cutting records and getting radio deals in the 1920s and 30s and 40s for being amazing cantors, we then have to try and preserve that music with people who are not a cantor from the 1930s and for a congregation that is not prepared to sit through a 5-minute rendition of Barhu. And so we are now in a place where we have melodies that were created precisely so that we would fit into a culture of the 1800s that eventually were created such a mood of this is tradition and elaboration in order to reach that high mark of high chazanut, of high cantorial skill, that now we essentially price the average congregant out of the market. Because how can the average person sing a song that was designed for somebody that would be of record caliber, somebody that might have a spot on the radio? Well, we do what we do. We file it down a little bit. We loosen up the vocal requirements. We tweak it so that it's a little bit more accessible. But we still have this lingering after effect, this lingering hesitation and lingering embarrassment, which is, most of us, I think, I can tell you from my own personal experience, especially when I was much younger, don't feel adequate to the music of the sanctuary. We feel second rate at best, if not third or fourth. We know we are not Pavarotti. We know that we are not really capable of reaching the majesty that these songs clearly were designed to have. And so we dial it down. And I think that was the problem with the We Shall Overcome when we sang that on this last Sunday. The performer was so exceptional, and you could hear his voice so distinctly in the largely empty room, but the rest of us were not going to compete. Why would I muddy his performance with my voice? God forbid anyone should hear me next to him. I would only be taking away from what he was doing. How often do we feel that way in the sanctuary, I wonder? How often do we feel that the person leading up there is doing such a good job that I don't want to be heard? Maybe I want to sing along. Maybe I want to participate, but if I'm too loud, what if someone turns around and looks at me? What if someone judges my singing? What if someone thinks that I am adding to an atmosphere of chaos? That I am adding to a lack of decorum? Are we still worried about what our neighbors are thinking for our singing? Are we still concerned that we're not good enough to participate? There is still a very real problem with that. And the ultimate solution, of course, is to recognize that this issue, this whole obsession with whether we're singing well enough or not, is entirely built around the idea of having somebody as a performer rather than as a representative. A representative is one of us, a performer is someone better than us. And I'm not going to buy tickets to go hear somebody just as good as me sing, but I'll buy tickets to hear someone better than me sing. That's what a concert is all about. But a Jewish service is not about having an intermediary. It is not about having a person representing Torah and God to the congregation. It is about having the congregation be led towards Torah and God by somebody that was chosen from among them. Not because they were superior in all ways, but because they knew the words, they knew the melodies, and they had a pleasing enough voice that people would be willing to feel inspired by it at the same time. Do we always need to be on the same page? No. That is something we need to recapture. Your prayer should be your prayer first and foremost. If the congregation has already moved on to Micha Mocha and you're not there yet because you are still reading the final paragraphs of the Shema, that's okay. You keep reading the final paragraphs of the Shema and the rest of the brachot, or the rest of the text of the blessing that comes afterwards, and you can catch up later. That's okay. And if you are on the same page as the person who has reached Micha Mocha, and they begin, join with them. We do have places where it is absolutely encouraged and vital to join together in that song. And if you are ready and prepared because your blessing, your own prayers have reached that point, join. And don't join dialed down to 2 or 3. Don't join in an undertone. You cannot sing if you don't sing. You cannot whisper while singing. You cannot sing under your breath. You sing with your breath. And that means that when we are singing together, when you are in that place and in that space, I want to hear all of you. I want to hear each and every one of you, because there is something magical, as much as I believe first and foremost in the power and the passion of the personal prayer. There is something magical about losing yourself among the community with the words of our tradition in a melody that allows us to escape the limitations of feeling just myself, but to feel others simultaneously. To resonate with the harmonic of the group is an incredible human experience. But it only happens when you allow yourself to be in the group, to be fully submerged within that moment, to engage with all of yourself, not a toe in the water. Dive in. No one's going to criticize your singing. If they do, send them to me and I'll set them straight. And you will find after a little while that you're not even criticizing your own singing. That you are enjoying the moment too much, that you are enjoying the feeling of connection that comes too much to worry about whether or not you are of Pavarotti caliber. And you'll realize that your voice blends beautifully with the entire group. That your voice belongs to the entire group. And that you shouldn't keep it bottled up inside. It is easier to sing with all of your soul than it is to sing with only part of yourself. There is a part of all of us that aches to be out and to be shared with the world and to feel the acceptance of having been shared. But you have to let it out in order for that to happen. In just a few minutes, Ilana is going to lead us in our Musaf service. She will be leading us in our Musaf service. I'm not trying to put any weight on her shoulders, because it's not her job to make all of you sing well. It's not her job to inspire you to sing. The inspiration should come from within. Because the words that she'll be saying with the aid of the microphone are the same words that are on the same books that are in your hands, and the same words that are within your spirit. Let it out. Let yourself sing. Give all that you've got. Don't worry if you're too loud. She's got a microphone. Everyone will still be able to hear her. You're not drowning her out. And by all of us being a little louder, it makes room for all of us to be a little more present. Singing is a great gift that God has given us. And it's one that, as Jewish people, we are still working out exactly how this works in a community versus private setting. But it is something that I think we have found a pretty good balance of where we want to be together, for example, the beginning of the Amidah, and where we want to be private, for example, the middle of the Amidah. But we have to give ourselves fully to both modes of expression. Allow yourself to be moved into song, and allow the song to prepare you to look in for the private. It's not easy, but it does get easier. Shabbat Shalom.